So, what did happen as a result of that conflict called the First Peloponnesian War? Well, there was peace. So, even in the Greek world where fighting happened all the time, there could possibly be such a thing as peace. Um, However, as we'll see when the actual Peloponnesian War gets underway, this peace was actually quite fragile. And that was often the case with the ancient Greek world, even when treaties were formed. Frequently, there was so much contentiousness going on behind the scene that the spirit of peace that might have temporarily obtained when the treaty was formed often would not stand the test of time. In any event, however, there was indeed a peace that was established at the conclusion of the First Peloponnesian War in 446 BC. It was a 30 years peace, and the 30-year term was the longest typical term that would happen for peace treaties. Now you'll notice it didn't make it to 30 years because, as you well know, the actual Peloponnesian War started 431 BC, a mere 15 years after the 30 years peace. So we'll see the reasons why that broke down. Now the terms of the peace were essentially that the Athenians and the Spartans basically concluded fighting. The Athenians were permitted to keep control over all of the allies that they had under the Delian League at that time, which by that point spanned almost all of the major islands and island groups in the Aegean Sea, with a few exceptions. The islands of Thera and Milos down south were not included. Certainly Crete itself was not included, and there were some islands further over south of Asia Minor that were not included either. But except for those, practically everything in the Aegean Sea was one of the islands supporting the Delian League. Then, of course, the Athenians also had their allies along the west coast of Asia Minor as well, especially noted Ephesus and Miletus. Sparta by this time had control over Messenia, which was the territory to its west that they had conquered back in the far back 700s BC, and Sparta also had control over inland cities that would include Mantinea. They had the alliance with Elis. They sometimes, on occasions, had the alliance with Argos, and they did also have control over other cities around the Peloponnesus, except for the central region known as Arcadia. That stayed outside of the Spartan control. So that was their main area, and then there were a few outlying islands also that were under Spartan control. So whatever allies existed prior to the war stayed in place. In the case of Sparta, besides the league itself, there was also Corinth that was on the Spartan side, now Megara on the Spartan side, and also further north, Thebes as well on the Spartan side. So all of those stayed in place, and the requirement was that both sets of allies were not to interfere in any way with other allies, and especially not to make war on each other. But beyond that, the two leagues were allowed to stay intact, and any neutral polis, any polis currently not allied with either of these two leagues, would be entitled to join the league as it wished, with, of course, the agreement of that league in question. There was actually a bit of a devil in the details with that we will talk about when we see the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War. This turned out to be a much more insidious problem than anybody realized. But for now, there was a state of peace, and with this state of peace established, this is great for the Athenians because Pericles now no longer has to worry about combat with the Spartans, and a few years prior to that, he had also concluded peace with the Persians. So you'll notice that this is about the period when the building program gets underway in Athens. Pericles now will start rebuilding the Acropolis and the rest of the city, and it'll be in this period that the Athenians will really turn quite firmly imperialistic. Clearly, the Athenians had already suffered some political setbacks in this period due to some military setbacks, and Pericles seems quite anxious to right some of those old problems and to really enforce Athenian rule quite strongly. If his intention had been to allow Athenian rule to last longer, this would turn out to be a fatal mistake. Because his effort to do so would end up recoiling on the Athenians very badly in the subsequent decades. So there's the 30 years peace for you. So we're now going to talk more about what actually did lead into the Peloponnesian War itself in our next video, and we'll also cover the other three plays of Sophocles that you were reading, the three that form the so-called trilogy, not really a trilogy, of Oedipus at Tyrannus, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone, the so-called Oedipus trilogy. We'll see you next video for the conflicts that led into the main Peloponnesian War.